Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. Welcome to everything you wanted to know about the CPIA Credential. My name is Maeve Lutine, and I am the Associate Director for Professional Development at Primer. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a few announcements. The agenda and all conference content can be found on our online platform. The link is on the slide, and I will also put it in the chat. The platform includes links to all live sessions, on-demand presentations, slides, our virtual poster gallery and exhibit hall, and after the meeting, the session recordings. Resources are included at the speaker's discretion. As a reminder, you need to be logged in to access the site and all content. Login information was sent to you in advance of the meeting. If you experience technical difficulties during the session, review the help desk page on the meeting site or use the chat box. And please make sure to review the technical requirements section of the attendee homepage on the platform to ensure your system is set up properly. This session is being held as a Zoom meeting, so speakers and attendees can interact with one another using audio and video. Attendees are encouraged to use video to participate when able. During the session, please ensure you stay muted when not sharing. To ask a question verbally, raise your hand and wait for the moderator to call on you. You can also use the chat box to answer and ask questions. The chat box is great to be used to chat with colleagues, share knowledge, and make comments. And we will be holding our questions and answers until the end of the session. Would like to thank our conference supporters and exhibitors for their support of this meeting. Please be sure to visit their booth pages in the virtual exhibit hall during this event. Virtual booth pages include information and resources provided by the vendors. And some vendors are offering giveaways and participating in real-time video chat. We especially want to thank our conference supporters, ATUNE, Cayuse, Huron Consulting Group, iMedris, and InfoEd. And finally, a reminder that registering for this event implies your understanding and agreement with Primer's principles and expectations for conference participation and our copyright policy. Anyone found harassing, badgering, or verbally threatening others during sessions and who are found to be sharing content presented during this meeting without permission will be removed from the meeting and/or prohibited from attending future Primer events. More information can be found at primer.org/aboutus/policies. I will now turn the session over to our speakers. Information on the session speakers can be found on the page. First, you'll be hearing from Denise Jackson, our CPIA Council Chair. Have a great session, everyone.
Great, thanks, Maeve. Just as she mentioned, I'm Denise Jackson, and I'm the Director of Animal Welfare and Research Integrity at Florida A&M University, and I am the CPIA Council Chair. Neither myself nor the second presenter, Hannah, have any relative personal, professional, financial relationships with respect to this educational activity. I've already introduced myself. Thanks. Next slide, please. So in this session today, we're going to be discussing the Certified Professional in IACUC Administration Program, the eligibility guidelines, and the exam application process, along with the recertification information. And Hannah is going to go over her, be able to share her experience and how she successfully prepared for the CPIA exam last year. So Primer established the Certified Professional in IACUC Administration's program in 2007 in response to community feedback for certification programs specifically targeted to IACUC professionals. And in inception, over the 13 years or more, there are over 600 individuals that have become CPS certified. The purpose of this certification is to improve the quality of animal care and use programs nationwide by promoting ethical practices and an advanced knowledge of the IACUC administration. The CPIA Credential constitutes formal recognition of an IACUC professional's broad knowledge of IACUC functions and expertise in the administration of animal care and use programs and the applicability of regulations. It strengthens the quality of animal care and use programs by providing an established body of relevant knowledge and national standards of a practice of an IACUC administrator. I wanted to share the presentation, wanted to start in this presentation sharing some information about some changes in the 2020-21 updates. We want to make sure that the candidates are comfortable where they're taking the exam. We have extended the testing period to 1 month, and the candidates are have now 2 exam delivery options. So this is really important, and they can either take their exams in person at the physical testing center or on their personal computers through a live remote online proctoring. And this happened just this past year due to the COVID, and we had a lot of individuals that took that option. So for the fall 2021 exam application deadline is September 3rd, and the testing period begins on October 4th. We anticipate that in 2022, the date and deadlines will be finalized in September. Due to the COVID-related travel restrictions, we have removed the cap on the number of credits a CPIA can earn for online training, conferences, and webinar credits. The caps on the credits for other categories have remained in place. The CPS Credential formally recognized IACUC professionals' broad knowledge of IACUC function and expertise about the administration of animal care and use programs. The CPIA Credential has become a sought-after commodity for employers. Over the past few years, more and more job descriptions have either mandated or preferred that a candidate be certified. This signals that by becoming certified, credential holders invest in their own marketability for future employment. Over the past 13 years, over 600 individuals have become certified, and over 400 individuals are currently certified. The CPA exam is open to those whose primary job responsibilities include substantial involvement in overseeing, administering, or performing the daily essential activities of an institutional's animal care and use committee's program. There are 2 pathways to eligibility: a bachelor's degree and 2 years of relevant full-time experience within the past 7 years, or no educational requirement and 4 years of relevant full-time experience in the past 7 years. Eligibility experience comprises both of a time and quality component and is defined as a direct performance or responsibilities of activities that characterize the IACUC administrator. There are 7 job functions that we will walk through in a moment that comprise the relative experience requirement. Most candidates will have experience in executing several or all of these tasks. In order to be eligible, exam candidates must coordinate the essential administrative functions on behalf of the IACUC. IACUC committee members, as well as those who interface with the IACUC on behalf of other offices, are not eligible to sit for the exam. In order to sit for the exam, candidate must have 2 years, 24 months of full-time experience. We created a formula to calculate the eligibility of candidates whose job responsibilities aren't fully dedicated to the IACUC administrative related work. For example, A candidate with 3 years or 36 months of experience who spends 50% of their working time on IACUC administration-related tasks has 1.5 years or 18 months of full-time IACUC experience. If this candidate were to stay in this position, they would need another year of IACUC administrative-related experience in order to sit for the CPIA exam. There is also another formula for those candidates who work at organizations that have less than one full-time equivalent employee assigned to IACUC administrative duties. Candidates must multiply their length of experience with the percentage of institutional program effort assigned to IACUC administrative-related work. The example of this slide shows that a candidate with 24 months of IACUC-related experience, calculated by 35% of the institutional program effort, has 8 months of full-time experience. This candidate would be eligible to sit for the exam once they have 6 years of experience in this particular role. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are 7 job functions that comprise the eligibility guidelines. Candidates must be responsible for the development, management, implementation, oversight, or administration of these functions. And it's important to remember that the candidates must perform these tasks on behalf of the IACUC, not on behalf of other offices within their institution. Exam candidates manage the workflow of the IACUC protocol review process from submission to approval, or communicate the IACUC's review of the protocol. This excludes drafting or submitting protocols on behalf of investigators. Eligible exam candidates coordinate the facility inspection of program review processes. This includes the development of the semi-annual report, documentation, maintenance, and insurance of all appropriate areas are identified and inspected. This excludes participating in a facility inspection as an IACUC member or as a facility staff member. Eligible candidates develop, manage, and implement IACUC policies, procedures, and guidelines. This excludes those who develop clinical care guidelines, animal surgical protocols, and standard operating procedures. So is there any questions about that? Because sometimes that does get a little kind of confused with candidates. Okay, good. Eligible candidates direct the preparation and prepare themselves regulatory and accreditation documents, such as those filed with ALAC, the Department of Defense, OLA, the USDA, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Eligible candidates also coordinate and manage continuing IACUC oversight of animal activities, and sometimes we call these post-approval monitoring, and the investigation of animal welfare concerns and/or non-compliance. Candidates manage the IACUC office and/or provide administrative leadership for IACUC committee functions. This will exclude serving as just an IACUC member of the IACUC. Eligible candidates provide and/or manage regulatory training programs for institutional staff. This does not include providing training programs on animal handling and/or husbandry. We have to make sure that it's including in the functions of the IACUC. The exam application and scheduling processes are handled by PSI, the testing company contracted by Priminar to administer the exam. The exam is administered twice yearly in 1-month testing periods each April and October. Candidates have an option of either sitting for their exam at physical testing centers or on their personal computers through live remote online proctoring. All exam centers adhere to the local public health restrictions and have strict social distancing and cleaning methods in place. A complete CPIA exam application consists of 3 components: the exam application, work verification form that outlines the job functions for which the candidate is responsible and must be signed by a candidate supervisor, a human resource representative, or a CPIA sponsor. You will also need your CV/resume that details IACUC administrative related experience. Candidates must submit all 3 of these components in order to have a complete application. The easiest and the quickest way to apply for the exam is by completing the online application, which can be accessed creating an online account with PSI. Candidates complete the online form and upload their work verification form and CV. Candidates also have the option of sending in their application on a hard copy by postal mail. And I really wouldn't suggest that you do this because what has happened during COVID, people aren't in the offices, and so sometimes mail has not been received in a timely fashion. A link to the exam application forms can be found on the Preminar.org/CPIA website. Once PSI receives an application, they coordinate the review process. Every effort is made to review the application within 2 weeks of receipt. If council members have any questions, candidates will be contacted by the Preminar office to provide additional information or clarification. We encourage all exam candidates to submit clearly written CVs detailing their IACUC administration related experience. The CPIA exam is ADA compliant, and candidates requesting accommodations work directly with PSI. Currently, there is a special accommodation forms that candidates complete. However, this summer, PSI will be launching a new online system, which will make the process for candidates much easier. Again, online applications have the quickest processing time. This option requires candidates to create a PSI account, complete the online form, and attach your CV and supplemental form. This is different than downloading the PDF copies of the form and mailing them to PSI. Include the phone number where you can be reached during the day. This will ensure that PSI will be able to reach you in case a test center is closed due to bad weather or an unforeseen event. Make sure that you include an email address that you actually check most frequently at psionline.com and goamp.com to your safe senders list. And be sure to monitor your junk, your spam, and clutter folders for receipts, application confirmation emails, and for instructions on scheduling your exam appointment. Be sure to retain the confirmation that includes your candidate ID number. Use and forget your password feature to look up your account. Since an email address can be connected to multiple accounts, this tool will ensure that you do not accidentally create a duplicate account. The application deadline date is the final day for application to be submitted online or postmarked. If it is not the final day for candidates to set up an exam appointment. The dates are structured to accommodate application review and exam scheduling for all applications received through the deadline date. The exam, the content outline. So the exam body of knowledge content outline is the framework for the exam content, and it is divided into 4 sections. The percentages displayed on the screen indicate the number of questions on the exam for each of the 4 sections. So how is this content determined? Content outlines are based on the results of empirical job analysis, which are comprehensive surveys that ask members of certification program targets audience information about their professional roles and duties. Job analysis are conducted every 5 to 7 years, and the most recent CPIA job analysis took place in 2016 through 2027. So we're ready to come on a new job analysis survey. The companion, some of the key references. The companion to the body of knowledge content outline are the key references document, which is an essential study tool in preparing for the exam. Think of it this way. If the body of knowledge content outline consists of the knowledge IACUC professionals need to execute their duties, the key reference document shows where you can find all of that information. The key reference lists the source documents for each of the exam questions and include federal regulations, policies, guidance, and frequently asked questions. All of the key references for the CPA exam are freely available to candidates and are found online. Beyond these items, the CPIA Handbook also includes a list of other resources as well as other study aids. The CPIA exam is a computer-based, and candidates have 4 hours to answer 250 objective multiple choice questions. This is a closed book exam, and candidates are unable to bring any reference materials to the testing center. While taking the exam, candidates have the ability to bookmark questions they want to return to a little bit later. And they also have the ability to leave comments on the questions. All of these comments are reviewed by the testing company and then referred to the CPIA Council. The exam question format. The scenario stated in the question require candidates to apply their knowledge of the regulations. All exam questions are multiple choice with 4 plausible answer options. There are no questions that the answer would be all of the above or none of the above. There are only, and there are no true and false questions either. Considerable effort is made to ensure questions are clear, relevant, and current. Questions are reviewed and revised several times before they are placed into the examination forms. Exam questions can be roughly divided into 2 categories. Either it's a direct question or an application question. Direct questions require candidates to recall specific pieces of information. The application questions require candidates to apply their knowledge to address a scenario-based question. It's easy, it's very, very easy to overthink a question. Don't add any additional assumptions to the premise that is presented in the question stem. The exam is based on federal regulations and guidance, not organizations' policies or procedures. So when you're reading a question, don't always think about, well, what's happening at my institution. Think about it as the general basic information that comes from the federal regulations about that question. So like I said, it's based on federal regulations and guidance and not any organization's policies or procedures. And now I'm going to turn it over to Hannah, who passed the CPA exam in 2019.
There we go. Hi, I'm Hannah. So this picture was taken back in 2019, and I definitely still look the same. Today we will be reviewing these points to hopefully ease your mind and answer any questions that you may have about this process. This includes why I decided to sit for the CPIA exam, how I studied in advance of the exam, my day of exam experience, and information on those who would like to take the test with accommodations like I did. When I first accepted a position in this field, I calculated that I had already been involved with animal research for over about 6 years between 2 different institutions. This meant that I had taken multiple required online training. When I began work in an IACUC office, I was handed up the PHS policy and the AWAR and told to read them and to know the information required for the office. So while I already knew the basics, I still learned a great deal from those readings, though I admit I glossed over sections that I thought I would never use. Skipping sections isn't possible if you go for this credential. You will need to read each section, from elephants to gerbils, in addition to those on mice and rats. You will need to know the requirements for the DoD and how they differ from Veterans Affairs. In addition, you'll need to know how the NIH fits into PHS, even if your institution doesn't receive any governmental funding. Having this credential shows that you know the U.S. requirement for multiple types of animals and governmental funding types. It shows that you will be able to handle more than what your program currently has and are committed to continuing your education in this field. Following notification that I had passed the CPIA exam, I received a promotion. I believe that my promotion was given in part because I had shown that I know the regulations and proven my commitment to maintaining informed about said regulations. If upward mobility is something you are pursuing, passing this exam and receiving the credential will likely help. Additionally, I have previously noticed this credential is something that a number of IACUC office positions include in their preferred hiring criteria. The choice on when to start studying is something that can be unique to each individual. Some people learn better if they study a little each day, and others prefer to cram. I started studying in a very casual way about a year in advance of taking the exam. This included a review of current regulations and ensuring that I had all current regulations saved onto my work computer. I would read during my lunch breaks or take the printout home with me. But I wasn't reading every night, and I wasn't only reading regulations. By that, I mean I was reading fun fictional books in between and outside of work as well. About 4 months in advance of the test, give or take, I ramped up the studying, and I was studying every lunch break, every evening, on the weekends, and I would be looking at materials and taking them over to friends' house to have them quiz me. It was very intense. And how I studied changed between the different study phases. During the casual study phase, I was just kind of reading the regulations, making notes on points I felt would be important later based on the information in the candidate handbook. During the intense study phase, I rewrote all of these notes into larger comparison charts, and the agencies were columns, the points of the different aspects were rows, and I noticed that this still required me to look up some aspects again. And additionally, I compiled a few timelines. A lot of these timelines are available online, but I just kind of condensed them into a comprehensive timeline and promptly forgot those dates on the exam. I use this information to make flashcards and write questions that I felt could be asked of the study material. I looked out for other study guides. Several of the ones that I was able to find online were older and therefore based on older versions of regulations that may have changed. And I didn't want to study something that may have changed. So if you're going that route, definitely double check to see when those studies guides were made and what regulations in terms of the actual when those regulations were updated. Additionally, I asked family and close friends that were stuck with me for the weekend to quiz me real quick and test me in that way. I felt that asking these questions multiple different ways in terms of visually seeing them or verbally hearing them would help me better understand the material. In terms of where I found the information to study, I went to the CPIA webpage on Primer's website. From there, I found the candidate handbook, which contained a collection of information I needed to know. This included things like my testing window and when the application needed to be in to meet the testing window. I also found the supplemental application that needed to be completed to receive accommodations, and the candidate handbook also included Primer's expectations for me in regards to the ethical expectations in this field. and what I could expect from Primer regarding the application process, the day of expectations, and when the results would be reported back. The first is important for those who would like accommodations, and we'll discuss that more in depth later. Most importantly for studying, and thankfully I looked at this before, it includes what themes will be on the exam and the present distribution between the different themes. It also has a few example questions that I knew so that I knew how to write my study questions similarly. Both the body of knowledge and the exam references can be downloaded from the Primer website, and both my work and home computers had copies of these documents, as well as at one point my phone. The body of knowledge is what I use to generate my comparison table across multiple agencies. It is important to make sure that you know when any study material you have been gifted was written. This includes the copy of the AVMA guidelines, which was updated in 2020, the Department of DoD instructions for the use of animal care programs. I looked at the CPIA exam references and resources and found that a number of government offices offered information that was obtained without incurring any costs. Additionally, a few other sites were ones that my institution already used for our online training. So I just ran those courses several times. A lot of those quizzes that we ask our research personnel, you can take yourself and quiz yourself on that information. In addition to independent studying, I wanted to know what others were looking to see if I was missing any key aspects. I found a Facebook group, Certified Professionals in IACUC Administration, which is sponsored by Primer. There's also a Yammer listserv that was formerly the IACUC admin listserv that is not affiliated with Primer. And I have since noticed an unaffiliated subreddit, R Animal Research, that's really not that active. Additionally, because I am working for a larger institution, I was able to discuss study strategies with another potential applicant and someone who had already previously passed the exam. The ability to ask others how they studied really helped me and helped form my study plan. Please remember that study materials generated for a previous version of the exam may contain outdated information. Again, check to see when that information was made so that you know whether or not it's current with the current regulations. For exams, I always tried to get a healthy for me amount of sleep the night before, and this was something I made sure to do for this exam. I ate a healthy for me dinner the night before and a healthy for me breakfast the morning of. I didn't study the night before to give my brain a breather. Regarding the day of exam, I took mine at a specific location that was across the city in a totally different town, and started prepping for what I would need to take with me the night before. Before going to sleep, I double-checked my alarm would wake me up. I ensured that I had all needed paperwork, like my ID, already prepared, and I put it in a pocket of my jacket because I was told not to bring a bag. Gathering these things the night before allowed me to leave a little earlier in the morning because I was concerned that there would be traffic. There was traffic, but I still made it, so I suggest you leave early. The test on a computer was provided to me. There was a brief tutorial on how to use the software, and then the test began. One of the big things for me was the ability to save a question for later. If I didn't get it immediately, I saved it. This is a timed test, and I felt it would be the better use of my time to flag questions for later if I had to think about the answer. There were a number of questions that were very cut and dry, and I knew the answer without even looking at the answer choices. But there were some questions that, for me it was dates, I really needed to think about. Those I saved for later. In the end, I did have enough time to place an answer for all of the questions, and I did find this helpful strategy where I eliminated those answers I was sure were not correct before making an educated guess. I will note that I did not get a perfect score, but I did pass with a safe margin. Relating to the idea of thinking about the question, I totally did overthink those questions, and at times I did feel I was doing badly because I needed to save so many questions. This is something that I work to prevent on a personal level, but it is something you need to be aware of for yourself. For me, there were questions that referred to the same regulation, but by different shorthand names, and I was able to put that in the end quiz not a quiz, it was more like a questionnaire where it was asking about how you felt you did on the test. So I made note of that. And for me, it was important to realize that these questions come from multiple people. So there may be a little bit of variation based on who's sending in these questions. They don't all have the same person writing all of the questions. It's also important to note that not all the questions were a call and reply. Some of them required me to actually think and to think about the situation and what regulations were actually applicable to those. For example, in a given situation with specific species and funding, what regulations are actually applicable? In a given non-compliant situation with a specific species and funding, what are you required to do? During the test, you are able to report individual questions you take issue with. And at the end of the test, there was a section where you could write information on the overall test as well. If you have a disability, chances are you are already familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act. For those who don't, in the context of this exam, it will allow those with documented disabilities to have reasonable accommodations on the exam. I have 2 very well documented disabilities, and I was able to successfully obtain reasonable accommodations for this exam. The biggest piece of advice I can give to those who wish to have accommodations is to start the application process early. I started several months in advance of when I thought I would need to send in those forms. Most people who seek accommodations through ADA know that the regulations mean that the exam process takes longer to register because of the additional paperwork, and that this exam is no different. Noting that the accommodations request form is in the handbook and will be mailed, I started my application about 3 months early, and I was able to actually send it in 2 days before the deadline. The reason for this long time getting my documentation together is because while I have documentation going back to kindergarten, I stopped needing to actually update it when I graduated college. I didn't have any documentation within the last just 5 years, and it was not in the same state as the previous doctor who documented it. I was able to take the form to my doctor, who then had to refer me to a specialist, who was then able to complete the form, and I was able to get accommodations. Waiting for the specialist was extra stressful because the application with all of the disabilities form and documentation needed to be sent in at least 45 days prior to the examination date. There is also an additional step for signing up for the exam, as you will actually need to call PSI until they actually get the new PSI testing online site operational. So you do have to send in the mail version, you do have to call ahead, and I strongly encourage you to get going on that stuff well in advance. The number is in the handbook, and the staff are very helpful. The staff at the testing center were equally helpful in understanding of what I actually needed. I didn't think that there was any major difference between my testing and someone who doesn't have an accommodations testing. It was all pretty much the same, except for the fact that I was in a special room. Okay, back to you.
Before we jump into some exam questions, does anybody in the audience have a question they want to share? You can use the raise my hand function, or you can send me a message in the chat.
Okay, you want me to go ahead, May?
Why don't we go ahead with the exam questions?
All right, so you're gonna have to answer us in the chat, okay? So which of the following is, oh, I'm sorry, I'll let you go to the next one. To the next slide. Okay, which of the following is authorized to appoint members to the IACUC? The IACUC chair, the IO, the AV, or the CEO? So what are some of the answers? Okay.
It looks like a lot of people are answering in the chat. I see a lot of IO and CEO.
Well, the actually correct answer is D, the CEO.
Here's the
Okay.
next question.
So records pertaining to which of the following are specifically required to be kept by research facilities under the Animal Welfare Act? Care and use of dogs and cats, care and use of animals covered by the Act, acquisition and previous ownerships of dogs and cats, acquisition and previous ownership of all animals covered by the Act.
Okay, again, I'm seeing a lot of people are entering into the chat. Answer C.
Well, that is the correct answer. C is the correct answer.
Yay.
So, question 3. According to the guide, which of the following is responsible for review and investigation of any reported animal welfare concerns? The IO only, the IO and the IACUC only, the IACUC and board of directors, the IACUC and senior management.
All right, people are using the chat again, and it looks like B is a popular answer.
Right. So when you look at this question, so it told you according to the guide. So then you have to shift your brain into thinking, okay, let me see what the guide says. So sometimes there's some little qualifiers there that kind of help you out. Okay, question 4. To use a designated member review process, each IACUC member must be provided with which of the following prior to review? A list of the proposed activities or proposed significant changes, a complete copy of each proposed activity or proposed significant change, a copy of all funding listed on the proposed activity or proposed significant changes, the title, species, and paying categories assigned to the proposed activity or the proposed significant change. So I'll give you a minute just to kind of read those through again.
Think through it. There's a wide range of different answers.
Yeah, you're right. So Hannah, what's the consensus there in the chat?
Unfortunately, it's B.
But the answer is actually A.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Like we said, the application deadline for this 2021, for the fall 2021 testing period is going to be September 3rd. The online application and PDF forms can be found at primer.org/CPIA. The cost for members is $350 and non-members $475. So, any questions? I don't know what's in the chat.
I just want to remind everybody that we also have a booth in the virtual exhibit hall. So you should come by one afternoon this week, and you should stop by and talk to council members and to Primer staff if you have any questions. And we do have, we've had some questions about CPIA practice exam, and that's something that's currently in development. I don't know when it will be available. but it probably won't be available until after the next testing period. But we will certainly keep everybody in the loop once we have a go live date. And the application dates for 2022, we generally get those finalized around Labor Day. So hopefully we'll have that information finalized around early September once again. And then we'll be sharing that information on our website, as well as in all of our newsletters once the 2022 application dates are finalized. But for the most part, we've been trying to stick with the month of October and the month of April, because we find that people find those to be good times to take the exam. Are there requirements to keep your certification once obtained? Denise, do you want to talk about the recertification options?
Yes, so yeah, you have it's 5 years that you get to recert. And what Primer has done has created a tracker. So that's also located on the website, the Priminar website. And so you're able to, like when you attend conferences and all of those stuff, or you review, write chapters for books or any other thing, conferences, webinars and things like I said, and because of COVID, the online activities, there wasn't a limit, but there's a tracker there that's really neat, and it allows you to keep up with everything you've done. So please don't wait till the end and then try to go back and remember everything you did. Just kind of use that and constantly keep up with your credits. And then that way you'll be easy to renew your certification. And you also are going to get reminders.
And I will say I started like the month after I got the certification, writing down all of the different things that I do. Primer does offer a additional certification credits if you're a member. So keeping up with all of those and keeping that throughout the entire 5-year period, definitely very, very helpful. Strongly recommend.
And yeah, you are able to either retake the exam, that's your choice, or you can use these continuing educational credit hours. I don't know how many of you want to sit for the exam again, but it is an option out there. It wasn't for me. So any other questions?
I'll just add that the certification term is 5 years. And so we ask that people complete 50 hours of continuing education. So it breaks down to about 10 hours a year. But you can complete those credits whenever you want within that 5-year period.
And I would suggest that you really kind of keep up with that and don't wait till you get to year 4 and you've got try to catch up with 40 hours. It can be a bit daunting.
So after that 5th year, once your recertification application is approved, you earn another 5-year recertification term. So everyone recertifies every 5 years.
It's continuing cyclical process.
Did that answer your question?
And we do have a lot of people out there who've been certified since 2007, 2008, when we first offered the credential, which is really exciting.
You don't always have to put your question in the chat. You can unmute yourself and talk. That'd be great too.
Oh, this is a great question. What is the cost to recertify? The cost to recertify is the same as the cost of the exam. So that is $350 for Primer members and $475 for non-members. Because people have both options, the exam or recert by continuing education, we want to make sure that those amounts are the same. And there are a lot of organizations out there that offer free recertification credit. OLA's webinars, if your organization has a membership to ALAS or Neighbor, some of those webinars count. So we try to make it as low cost as possible for people.
So
And
maybe the question was, is there a scholarship? Was that scholarship for recertifying or scholarships to take the exam? I just want to make sure we answer the question correctly.
we do not have a scholarship program at this time.
Because sometimes at your institutions, they may pay for recertification, especially if it's been a requirement for you to get the credential. You're welcome. So maybe you want to answer that?
Sure. This is a great question, Brittany. It's about whether there's been discussion on taking away testing periods and have it open at any time since you test online or in a testing center. So that's not something we're able to do right now, just with the way the exam has been developed. Right now, we have the exams offered twice a year in 1 month testing periods. If we shift to a different exam format, we might be able to offer the exam differently. We know a lot of organizations do allow people to test within a longer time frame. And right now, what you usually need for that is you need to have lots of different exam forms out there. So if we get to the point where we have lots of exam questions and we have all the manpower behind developing multiple exams, then that's definitely something we could consider. But just with the size of our program, it doesn't make sense for us to do that logistically speaking on the back end. Although I think from a customer service point, that would be awesome. But hopefully, maybe there'll be changes in the near future.
So the time frame between when I took the exam and getting the notification was only a couple of weeks, it felt like. I think it was probably maybe over a month, but it definitely went quickly. I think I took the exam in the latter part of April, and I got notification the first week of May.
And I think that really depends on where in the testing window you actually sit for the exam, how long your time will be.
We usually, the goal is to get the exam results out within 3 weeks of the exam window closing. And there were some delays last fall because of COVID. But what we're hoping to do is within a week or so of the testing period closing, giving everybody kind of a ballpark figure of when we think the exam results will be sent. For security purposes, they don't tell us ahead of time when they're going out. But what we do is we do try to loop back with everybody once we receive word that they're in the mail. And yes, exam scores are sent via postal mail for security purposes. So on your applications, it's important to use the address where you will be able to get your mail. And it's honestly, especially if you register ahead of time, a few months ahead of time, it's really hard to remember what address you used. So we'll be looping back with everybody about the addresses they put on their applications so we can get all of that squared away so you can get your results as quickly as possible.
There's another chat question. Is there a standard passing score or committee meets after each exam to set the passing score after reviewing the results? I'll let you answer that one, Meg.
So this is a great question. After each exam testing period is closed, PSI does an equating analysis. So statistically, they look at how well people performed on each of the questions. They try and see if any of those statistics show that there's an anomaly, that a question might be wrong. And then what they also do is they also make sure that the exam forms, so different exams are equated equally. So one exam isn't harder than the other. And then that's when they come up with a cut score. So there is a different passing score for each exam, and we don't know what it is until after the testing period is over. It usually is about 70 to 72% of questions have to be answered correctly in order to pass. And also just to make sure everyone's on the same page, everybody gets a point for every question they get right. You are not penalized for incorrect or unanswered questions. So you don't have to worry about losing points or as long as you get a question right, you get a point.
And on the printout that you get after you pass, it does have a little bar that will show you where the cutoff is for your test and where you managed to get.
And this is a great question. What is the typical first time passing rate? Historically, it's about between 68 and 70% of first time attendees pass the exam the first time they take it. And this is another great question. Should we answer all questions even if we don't know it? And it can only benefit you if you select what you think is the best answer. You're not going to lose any points. No points will be deducted if you answer incorrectly or if you leave it blank.
So I would suggest the strategy of eliminating the answer choices you know are wrong and then making an eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
And you also have the ability to bookmark questions. So if you have time after you finish the exam, you can go back and you can double check your answers. Although I have been advised that, if you want to change your answer, do you change it? Do you go with your gut? Or, do you go back and do you change it? That can be nerve-wracking. So some people don't use the bookmark feature for those reasons.
It is nerve-wracking, the whole test.
Everybody, it's not only are you preparing for the exam, but you needed to have at least 2 years of experience before that. So it's a tremendous amount of work that goes behind any exam sitting.
Yeah.
Just one other thing I really want to make sure that I point out is that think of only the guide, the key references, because sometimes we really get kind of wrapped up in what happens at our own institutions, and we read way too much into a question, and we end up getting it wrong because well this is how it's at my institution, but we have to go exactly how the references are stated and the federal regulations.
So
go ahead, Meg.
Elliot asked who writes the exam questions, and that I think is a great question in itself. The questions are written by members of the CPIA Council, and Denise is the chair of that group. And it's a group of 11 incredibly dedicated individuals who are volunteers, and among their duties are to write and edit exam questions. And CPIA, anybody who is a current CPIA is welcome to submit an application to join the CPIA Council. We'll be doing a call for new members later this summer. And one of the main things that they do is they're the keeper of the questions. And so we'll be sending out more information about council responsibilities and what those entail. and sharing that with the CPIA community to see if there are people who would like to join the group.
We really work hard at making sure that when you read their question, you know exactly what's being asked, and that the answer choices are very clear and concise.
And someone is asking about specific prep courses, and there is no specific prep course for the CPIA program.
There's a list of reading materials that's in the handbook. So if you go into the handbook, you'll see a list of types of information that you should know and a list of reading materials, but it's basically just a lot of reading, a lot.
And one question that we always get is, you know, what about DOD and VA? And yes, there are questions for all of those. So if you don't work at those kind of institutions or have those grants or whatever at your current institution, you still have to go over that information.
And that may be something, if you're very familiar with certain aspects of what is going to be asked, then you may be spending more time on the things that you know you don't touch. So I know what I do on a daily basis, and I feel very confident in the regulations regarding those. But for me, I didn't really have any experience with VA, so I spent more time studying the stuff that I knew I didn't have experience with.
And the CPIA Body of Knowledge Content Outline is the document that lists the percentage of questions on each of the topics. And we have that included as a handout for this session. We have a packet that you can download just from the same place where you launched the session. And that content outline is part of those documents. And is it pretty good about sticking to
So yeah, so the questions are definitely more IACUC related and not husbandry related. So the parts of the guide where it's talking about the regulations involved with husbandry might be on there, but for the most part, it's talking about the committee aspect of it. So we're not necessarily talking about, you know, how many mice you have to have in a certain size container.
And the exam questions are reviewed to make sure that they are up to date. And if there's ever something that's kind of late breaking, right before a testing period, you know, we make sure that everybody knows what rules are on the exam. And then, is online testing here to stay, or is it temporary due to COVID? We are committed to offering both online options and in-person options for people to sit for the exam. We want to make sure that people are comfortable and they're safe where they're testing. And for some people, that's going to a testing center, and for some people, that's sticking at home. So we'll be offering both those options moving forward. And Sabrina's asking about reading the materials listed in the handbook, and those are the materials that you need to use. It's the same list that we publish elsewhere. So if you read the materials listed in the handbook, you can feel very confident for having gone through the material that would be on the exam.
And oftentimes the material that is covered in that handbook is available in like the city or the ALAS quiz that are talking about working with the IACUC. A lot of institutions use online training modules specific to working with the IACUC, and just taking those training modules ad nauseum can be helpful because it's the same material.
And thank you, everybody, for these great questions. We are over time. So this is our last call in case you have a question to share. If something doesn't come to mind now, visit us at the booth. And then you can always email us at certification@primer.org. And many thanks to our presenters, Hannah and Denise. And this is just your hourly reminder that conference evaluations will be sent at the end of each week. Upon completion of the evaluation, you will receive access to your certificate of attendance. Session recordings will be available within 48 hours of the session airing. Thank you very much and have a great evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.